The coronavirus is starting to take a greater toll on the Bay Area tech industry. Apple announced it is cutting its sales forecast, and Facebook is also feeling the fallout. Joining me now is Reilly, senior editor with CNET. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's talk about Facebook because it canceled its upcoming conference in San Francisco. That's a big deal.
It is a big deal. It's not maybe their biggest public-facing show, but it's a big marketing conference for Facebook, expected to bring about 4,000 or 5,000 people to the Bay Area. And that's a really big impact when you're thinking about things like tourism. All those people have to stay in hotels, have to eat out at restaurants. But basically, Facebook was concerned that the coronavirus outbreak could be really damaging, and they didn't want a whole bunch of people meeting together and potentially sharing germs.
And that's a good point. It's not only affecting Facebook, but all of the surrounding businesses that really get a lot of money from these tourists. So a cybersecurity conference also in San Francisco scheduled for next week. Some concerns about that?
Yeah, that's a much bigger one. IBM was a key sponsor of that one, and they've decided to pull out. This one, we're talking about 40,000 people, and so that brings a whole bunch of cybersecurity experts to the downtown area. All of those people, when you have a big brand like IBM pulling out, that starts to have a knock-on effect. People might be thinking about whether they should be attending the show. So there was a cybersecurity conference a couple of weeks ago, and people suggested like waving to each other rather than shaking hands because there's that concern about person-to-person contact. Even though it's not as much of a problem here, obviously, as it is in China, there is still a concern about spread.
And then just with the big crowds too?
Absolutely. I mean, you think about everyone coming together. I go to these conferences. I go to CES in Las Vegas every year. That's a big tech show. Sure. And it's basically when everyone is touching hands. I got the flu at CES this year, so I can very much empathize with these people being concerned about the spread of germs. But it's obviously a big time for brands to kind of do business, make deals, so it will have a massive knock-on effect for the tech industry.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And concerns over the coronavirus also shut down the world's largest phone show?
This one is massive. So obviously Facebook and IBM pulling out of this cybersecurity conference are big for this area, but the world's biggest phone show in Barcelona. So we had brands like Facebook, like Intel, big brands pulling out, and eventually Mobile World Congress, the organizers of this event, they had to just say we can't run it because when you don't have all of the big brands there, what's the point of the show? So, I mean, the knock-on effect of that is that's when big phone retailers and big phone brands kind of have chats about what stock they're going to sell in stores this year. And obviously 5G, that's a really big thing around mobile technology. It's really going to be shaping the devices we use this coming year. 5G was going to be the big part of this show, but now that it's not happening, we're not going to be hearing about what the carriers are going to be doing, what the phone brands are doing. So, I mean, while Apple, Samsung, those big providers, they will still launch devices, it means that we're less likely to hear from some of the smaller brands.
Yeah, so then what happens? They have to get more creative in getting the word out?
Yeah, well, I mean, you think about all of the press coming to these big shows to tell everyone what they're going to be using this year for their handsets. None of the press are going to be going. So, yes, some of the smaller brands have to kind of think about, we don't have that captive audience of people to share our message. How are we going to tell people about our 5G plans? How are we going to get people excited for this phone, We're seeing a lot of new stuff this year. 5G, foldables are really big this year. So we're expecting some really cool stuff out of the show, and now that it's not happening, it's going to have a real knock-on, yeah.
Yeah, you say, real fallout for Facebook, for these phone companies and whatever. How many, I mean, do we know how much money we're talking about here?
Well, I mean, Apple is one really good example. Today/overnight, they announced that their earnings guidance, their revenue guidance is actually going to be down. So they have problems with factories in China. While they don't produce in the Hubei province, they are having problems with other factories around the country closing down. All of these brands manufacture in China, so that's obviously knocking on how much they can produce, how many handsets, how many devices. They might get their components from these factories, so it starts to slow down the product, which slows down how many people can buy the product. That's not to mention all the retail stores in China that have shut down because of the virus.
Sure, and then the conferences here in the U.S., like you said, not as many cases in the U.S., I mean, not even near what we're seeing in China. When do we start not worrying about that and then start these conferences over again that are very important to these companies?
Yeah, that's a big question. Obviously, everyone's talking about public health first and foremost, and we've got the World Health Organization and public health officials still not entirely sure how this pandemic is shaping up and how it's shaping up to be a public health emergency potentially outside China. So there is concern. I think there's an abundance of caution right now, and the idea is that hopefully we can just be really careful early on and stop the spread and then get back back to business as usual, because for businesses around the Bay Area, it's a massive deal.
It is. All right, Claire Reilly, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for coming on. And of course, you can tune in every Tuesday to see our Tech Talk with CNET. We have new topics every week. Stick around.